Well, I just want to say that I always enjoy being in Winchester, and I felt like my two groups went very well. We talked a little bit about some of the statistics around stress in America, that there actually is a survey that happens every year, every 18 months, surveying various groups of Americans that deal specifically with stress, how we handle or how we don't handle stress. So that was really the core of our conversation, and I thought it was a great conversation. We talked a lot about what stress in multi-generational ways. So if you're someone who we call the mature, someone born before 1950, what are your stressors when compared to a Gen Xer or millennial, someone born after 1990? So as you can imagine, a very rich discussion.
Yeah, that's fine. But I mean, what I was kept thinking is I was bouncing around from session to session and trying to integrate the sense of what stress might have to relate to living in Winchester, and realize that the level of stress has changed dramatically in the last 40 or 50 years as the town got better. The irony, the paradox, is that living in Winchester 40 or 50 years ago, when it was really quite ordinary, quite, you might even say, mediocre. It was a mediocre school system, there was nothing distinctive about it, and the houses were reasonable to buy. Real estate dealers would show you certain neighborhoods and not others. You lived with whatever there was here, and you just used the town for a bedroom and whatever you wanted to use it for. The town has improved dramatically. It's a different place than it was 50 years ago. And along with that, the level of stress has dramatically risen for all of us. As you listen to the sessions, people have issues in the town now when they didn't care 50 years ago. So the paradox is you care more, and you are aggravated more.
Hello. So we talked about classism, class privilege, and conversations like that. So here are some of the things that we covered. We talked about the fact that we have a myth in this country that we are a classless society. And more and more folks are realizing that that is not true. We can see that what is happening with the mainstream conversation, with the economic meltdown, with the Occupy movement, etc. More and more folks are recognizing that, in fact, we have a lot of issues that have to do with class in this country. And the two groups that we had were highly participative. Folks had a lot to say. And it was clear there was a lot more to be said and to be done and places to go from that conversation. So folks want to keep talking about it and do more than talk, but also come up with some solutions to the ways that class and class privilege impacts the community. Specifically, we talked about things like how folks will have assumptions about other people's class based on what they know or what they see about them. So if we know somebody's religion, we might have an assumption about what class they might be in. Their ethnicity, the neighborhood that they live in, the school that they're going to or their kids are going to, the education that they have or the profession that they have. Folks will will think that they know what somebody's value, will assume that they might know what somebody's values might be or what their intelligence might be based on assumptions around class. There was quite a bit of conversation about immigrants in town, and how some folks might have assumptions about what class they're in, what their income might be or their education might be. Some folks talked about the fact that sometimes we confuse education with affluence, and those aren't necessarily the same things. The fact that immigrants may be here and may have property, but may not be allowed to vote, for example, if they're not citizens. So a lot of times with folks who are immigrants, they may not have a voice to represent themselves adequately and to counter some of these stereotypes and assumptions. Some folks talked about the joking and the comments that go on in town based on some of these differences, including ethnicity, race, immigration, et cetera, et cetera. Some folks also talked about the, where we can see it in town. So for example, we might see it in the education system, we might see it in zoning practices, we might see it in the schools that folks are going to. One person even mentioned that we could see it in the historical society in terms of what history we choose to look at and to focus on in Winchester, what we acknowledge and what we forget about in terms of the history of Winchester. So I think that's sort of a summary of the different kinds of things that we talked about in our group. Thank you.
It's a great opportunity when you hear people put it within a historical context, because America as a nation is a nation without memory. We don't have much memory. Americans don't look back. Maybe it's because we all came from somewhere else. But the sense that we have of our past is one that we individually will make up as we go along. And we've always been a nation of immigrants. We've always been a nation that never really accepted or liked the people who were coming here the minute we got our foot here. That sense of be like us or else has always been the driving force in this country. And we do create our own history. It's the way we are as people. Winchester will create its own history also. Paula?
I was and am pleased to see so many people from Winchester ready to spend a Sunday evening talking about difficult things. I assume that the organization, the Winchester Multicultural Network, was formed to deal with issues that it saw looming, difficult, and needing to be resolved. And so, in the two groups that I met, I had them interrogate and challenge the meaning of multicultural and multicultural and the positives and the negatives of multiculturalism, what it means to have a multicultural society. I think the groups dealt carefully and deeply with the fears and the concerns that so-called citizens and Americans have about the presence of people who are new and people who are different. And I wanted to leave with a group, with the groups that I met, and I hope that I have, that many of the people who are labeled as immigrants know no other country but this country. And to keep stressing that the first generation is the only and biggest problem to tackle is myopic. We have to realize that we have children of immigrants who know no other country, who will participate, who can bring their skills, who can make sure that the society is rich and interesting. And so I wanted the groups to begin thinking about what the fears are, what are the positives of multiculturalism, what are the negatives, and what the society can do to make immigrants settle and thrive. That should be our unless we want to cut our noses to spoil our faces, we have to make sure that the people who call this country home, we have to make sure that they settle and that they thrive. If they do, then we all
Oh, point Paula makes about the second generation. The most popular name among second generation born Latino children in the United States. The first name for girls is Ashley, and for boys it's Kevin. There is something that drives second and third generation people to try to fulfill that American desire, be like us, and they want to be like everybody else. We have no national policy that works about assimilation. We have no idea how we assimilate people, and yet of all the countries in the world, it seems that the United States has a capacity to assimilate better than any other nation. We don't know why. And now it will become a big challenge because we'll be assimilating people of color to a larger extent, and it'll be an interesting challenge. But if you look at the number of intermarriages that are going on in this country, and that will continue going on, someday we'll examine what we do and try to figure out if there was any policy behind it. But if we just go ahead and muddle our way through and somehow manage it. About 60 years ago, Ralph Ellison wrote a book called Invisible Man. You could have taken any immigrant in that time, any hyphenated American, they would have been invisible. America was invisible to all ethnicity and all immigration, all foreign, what they would call foreign people 60 years ago. If there ever were invisible people in the United States 60 years ago, it was people with disabilities. Nobody cared about them, nobody looked at them, nobody wondered about them, they were invisible. So having Bert here today and having a session on this becomes a really meaningful step forward, at least, in how Winchester and the country examines this issue. Bert, you want to tell us what went on?
I started out both sessions by asking, what's fabulous about Winchester? And I got some great responses. You have a bookstore everyone seems to be in love with, is that correct? As we learned today, you're on the Guinness World Book of Records for...
Closest relatives.
And the one thing that struck me in both of the sessions, and I don't know how broad, I don't know that this is broad, sweeping, I think you have your different subgroupings, but you have an incredible sense of community here. And also an incredible sense of community participation and activity. It's been quite a while since I have actually spoken with a group where I got that strong of a sense of, we are the people, we are here, we are together. That was an incredibly powerful statement. And after we talked about what was so fabulous, and I do mean that sincerely, about Winchester, I said, can everyone benefit from it? And then the conversation changed in both groups. And people it was actually revealed and kind of surprising to me, although I've heard snippets, not only in the groups, but snippets of other conversations I've had with people today, about how late in the game Winchester came to actually do what the law has indeed required them to do for the last 50 years. And 50 to 20 years, depending on which law you're talking about. And that was kind of shocking. So we started asking questions. Why? Why are there buildings that have been built after 1990 that would have fallen under the Americans with Disabilities Act that's having to be accessible to everybody? We're not talking people with disabilities as if they're somehow this separate entity, but everybody. How come that didn't happen here? How come there are buildings that were built while 504, which is the Rehabilitation Act, which required any entity receiving federal funds, any federal funds, had programs and services that were completely accessible to all human beings. And that wasn't implemented here. So we had lots of questions as to why. We had some great discussion about thinking outside the box. We had discussions about businesses. So there was one individual who I asked, who we had this conversation about how many businesses here are really not accessible. And one individual garnered a guess, but I think the guess is actually maybe a low ball. I don't know Winchester, so don't throw eggs at me, okay? But she said maybe 50% are accessible. That seems actually kind of low relative to my living in New England area with the older buildings around. That seems kind of low, so if you're that high, that's fabulous. But we weren't sure about that either. A lot of our conversation boiled down to value. And we had, in both groups, I had an extensive conversation about economics. Because the part we often forget, and it's what I hear everywhere, not just here in Winchester, it's what I hear everywhere. You guys are too few and you're too damn expensive. That's what I hear. Whether people want to say it to my face or not, that's what they're thinking. So I took the time in both groups to really talk about, well, wait a minute, you're asking the wrong question. Why is it so expensive? Why are a lot of companies getting away with charging exorbitant prices for services that really, if they were lowered the cost, more people could buy them? I mean, you can make your money either by selling I to a few or low to many. Well, they don't do that in this country. Why? I'm not expensive because it's my fault. I'm expensive because I'm an economic item to a lot of vendors who can make a ton of money off of me. Their margins are huge. They won't tell you that, but they are. And what I'm trying to do with that statement is divert this sense that we, because we're different, inherently cost a hell of a lot of money. It's not us, folks. It's the economic system who are making money off of who we are and our differences. So we had a lot of conversation about leveraging inexpensive ways to change this concept of value that we have around people who are different. Really cheap things, like maybe in a certain location having an evacuation chair, which would be for someone in a wheelchair, but maybe somewhere right in this building, like right outside the revenue office where you have to pay your taxes, as a reminder of how valuable people with disabilities are. We talked about something as cheap and no cost as making sure all the curb cuts are cleaned out of snow after every snowfall. Isn't that a clear statement of what we value? And ultimately, what we value becomes what we expect. Okay? So we had those kind of conversations. I felt really good that we kind of touched on a really broad spectrum. And we went beyond just thinking of those disabled people out there to say, you know, we're not talking about disability. We're talking about human diversity. It's not those disabled people, it's us. All of us who benefit from this. And I don't say this as a threat, I say this as in a way, to me, a wonderful thing. You all, I can do my Texas thing, y'all, are going to join the ranks, 90% of you, of needing some kind of accessible feature. Now, rather than saying that's such a negative thing, isn't it marvelous that we realize that we're still full human beings? We really are completely full human beings, regardless of what happens to our packaging. It's marvelous we live in a world like that. But I would encourage us here to work a lot harder at embracing that value of and for people with disabilities everywhere, every time.
So I feel like this WIT conference maybe can be rebranded because it is about Winchester in transition, certainly about the ways in which this community, like many other suburban communities, are transitioning from what was once a predominantly white, upper class suburban community to something much more multicultural than it once was. And that's certainly what this conference is about. I think more than that, this is a conference about community, dialogue, and future action. And so that's what I would hope that our participants take away from today and that viewers take away from their understanding about what we were doing here today, is that we came together to talk, to come together as a community, and then to do something about it.